Hello friends, we are here with one more video, which is more on the financial services. Let's look at some of the connecting points which defines which financial services can be exempt, which are taxable, and within taxability, which can be a zero rated also. Now the financial service, FTA has already released a VAT guide in 2019 itself. So if you see, they have clearly defined as per the law also and as per the guide also, what is defined as a financial services. So I'll go a little fast in this because you know all those points. Just going to read the highlighted points if you see there. If you do an exchange of currency, check or letter of credit is being used, debt security, loans advance or credit, debt security, equity security or a credit contract, guarantees, indemnities, security, bond in respect of performance of obligation, whatever we talk about. Even the current or deposit or saving accounts are part of the financial services. We also include the transfer of ownership of financial instruments whenever it is getting changed from a person to another, interest, principal, dividend, or other amount, whatever we call in the name for, and arranging of any of the activity which are specified in A to I above. That means if you're doing any kind of a consultancy and you're getting a fixed fees, all those are considered as part of financial services. Now, which financial services become taxable and which are going to be exempt? So there is a very interesting fine line which comes into play. So the following financial services shall be exempt. So what are the exempt is being defined very clearly. Activities where they are not conducted in return of any explicit fee, discount, commission, rebate, or similar. So whatever name we call about, if there is not related to any fees or commission, then we call it an exempt. Second, very important point, the issue, allotment, or transfer of ownership of an equity security or a debt security. So you are just changing the paper instrument. That means you are transferring the shares or you're transferring the debt. So that's also goes into the exempt category. And the third foremost thing, which is ownership of life insurance contract. So it has nothing to do with medical or anything. It's pure life insurance contract, or it includes the reinsurance also. So we can talk both. Now the interesting point comes further, which says, which is part of Article 31. So if you look at zero rating of export of services, which is, so it says if any of the services provided where zero rating or export of service logic can apply, then any service, although it may be exempt in UAE, can be classified or should be classified as zero rated. So that's a very important point. So if I say, if I'm earning interest within the banking industry, let's say, then that's an exempt if it is within UAE. But if I'm earning an interest from an outside location, let's say I'm getting an interest from London, then it will be definitely classified as zero rated. So it's a very important point, not only on the classification, but yes, you can claim input tax also based on this classification. So this is a important point to look for. Now, if I go back to the guide, now what guide says, it clearly says export of services. They have classified between GCC, non-GCC also. So right now, the GCC, we are not getting covered because there is no implementing state as we talk. Hence, I will read this without considering the GCC in place. So it says the supply of financial service to a recipient established outside the GCC. At this stage, we can read it as outside the UAE will be zero rated. That is, they are treated as a taxable supply. So this is an important point to look at and a very relevant thing, especially in the financial sector and even for the industries or companies which are receiving the dividend from outside. So when you're receiving a dividend from outside, we need to look at taxability considering the points which we covered. I'll pick up an example at a later stage. Let's look at this. Again, the financial services guide. So this is again an elaboration of how the GCC implementation is talking about. When and whatever time the implementation state logic gets implemented, there is going to be a provision of RCM or reverse charge mechanism, which will be deployed. And I think if we leave it right now at this stage, this point is valid because right now we don't have an implementing state. So whenever the implementing state logic comes, we'll look at how the treatment can be done. So that's a point which may be a futuristic, but already given the guide how the treatment should be done. I'll pick up an example where maybe a JAVSA, which is a holding company. So a lot of time we have seen companies which are holding companies, and the investment of that holding company is done outside UAE. So when you do an investment outside UAE, you may be getting an interest or a dividend from the foreign jurisdiction. So any investment outside UAE in GCC countries or investment outside UAE, outside GCC countries. So right now we are treating both as in the parlance. So hence it should be classified as zero rated and treated as a taxable supply. So when we call it a zero rated, we need to make sure that we are registered as per UAE legislation, because taxable supply includes zero rating taxable supply, and adequate reporting should be done in the VAT returns, or whichever way the communication is going to tax authorities. Now, from where all these points are getting derived from? So, as I said, Article 42 of Executive Regulation talks about wherever the Article 31 applies, then we should treat the supplies to be zero rated. Again, as Article 31 is being defining the zero rating of export of services, we should always look at even a decree law on the Article 54, which talks input tax recoverable position. So that also gives a reference. And important to look at Executive Regulation 52. Here also the input tax recovery in respect of exempt supplies being provided. So here it says supplies refer to paragraph 3, paragraph C or clause 1 of 54, which is how the input tax can be recovered. The decree law are the supplies of financial services, where place of supply of these services treated as outside the state, and the recipient of services outside the state at the time when services are performed. So this gives a complete reference that yes, we can cover input tax also on that. Now, one interesting point which comes, like what should we do when we import the services? That means I'm basically paying the interest. So when I'm paying the interest, technically speaking, I'm importing the services. What should we do? So it's a completely opposite of export. Should we cover it as part of RCM? The answer lies here. So let's look at where the services are received from outside the GCC. Those services should be liable to VAT at the standard rate, where the supplies will be standard rated supplies were they do be made in the UAE. Now here the point which refers to is we need to look at what is the rate being applied if the supplies were done within the UAE space itself. So if you look at in this scenario, the imported services will be subject to reverse charge mechanism, as the importer has supplied these services to itself. This is all goes as import of services. But if you look specifically on the section, it says it can be considered as imported if these are not exempt. However, if you look at financial services, which is interest and dividend, we looked at these are exempt services. Hence, in the case of financial services, if financial services are provided within the state, then it will be exempt. So if you know, these are exempt categories. So if it is exempt category, RCM technically does not apply. So you have looked at, if you export, we are calling it a zero rated, perfectly fine, but it is import, then we don't need to do an RCM for interest or dividend or any of the services in the financial sector which are exempt had these been provided within UAE. So this is a very important and relevance point you need to look at. Hope you find this video interesting and maybe something additional which you have got into. You can refer to my RCM section also on how the RCM and what is the meaning of RCM. So if you like it, just give a thumbs up and do subscribe to the channel. That will help us to also to build up something more. Thank you very much and wish you a great time. Till we meet together. See you. Bye-bye.